The thing I've been thinking about is how we live our lives through an illusion basically all the time. And how even when we think we're interacting with reality, we're often just interacting with an illusion. We're interacting with something in our own mind and not the real world. Well, what do I mean? What do I mean? What do I mean by that? As you get older, you are trained, conditioned to create thought structures about the world and what the world is. And at a certain point, and at a pretty young age, I would say, once you get into your teenage years and definitely by adulthood, you're engaging the world not as it is, but through those structures that you've created in your mind. And it can be very extreme to the point where everything, even when you see a tree, you're not really seeing the tree, you're seeing it through this lens of your conditioned experience. But we often do it mostly with other people, to the point where I don't think that we often experience other people as they are. We see them through a lens of what we expect. And the more you know someone, the more that structure gets built up, and less you see them as a person. And I think it's important, in order to live an authentic life, to begin to strip away those illusions, those constructs in our mind, and to engage the world as it is, to engage reality, rather than basically just engaging with our mind and thinking we're engaging with the world. Now, you might think, well, these structures in my mind are just from my experiences, which happened in reality, so they're based in some kind of truth, right? If Lucy asks me to kick the football, and I know that every time she's done this for the past 5 years, she's pulled the football away right before I kicked it and I fell on the ground, that's not a conditioned experience, or that's not a illusion, that's not a thought structure that I've created. I know she's going to do that because that's what she's always done. And so when she asks me to do it again, I say no, because I know what she's doing. There's a difference between stripping away these illusions and engaging the world as it is, and being totally naive and never learning anything, and not accepting what might happen, or trying to project or predict what might happen based on the past. Where the danger really comes in is in reading into things beyond your prediction, beyond the simple prediction of what might happen. And predictions in and of themselves can be hairy, because you can get into a spiral where you predict how entire conversations and social interactions will go, and find out that there was no reality to any of that. But if it's something where you're fairly sure, like Lucy taking away the football, it's one thing to say, well, this is a probable outcome. But it's another thing to then go a step further and try to analyze the psyche of the other person to understand their motivations, their intent, and basically that's what judgment is to not just be predicting an action that they will take, but then to also assume it's because of the things in their head which you have no idea what's going on. Because they're a bad person, because they're out to get me, because they don't have any common decency, because she doesn't know how to empathize, because she thinks she's better than me. That kind of stuff, to go down that road. So what do? How can you strip back all that? And is it worth it? Will you get more hurt if you try to interact with the world as it is and see it fresh and new every time? You may, I know I do, you may have memories of childhood where you can kind of remember before you had all this conditioned experience, before you understood the way the world works and you had your ideas in place firmly in your mind. You can remember those times in childhood, and for me those memories are often full of joy, and the world is magical. And very occasionally you'll get reminded of those times by some random trigger, like a smell, the quality of the light at a certain time of day. Something random will bring you back to that, and for a moment your mind is stopped and you're just taken back to what it was like to be a child who didn't have any ideas about the world and just experienced it, just perceived it. Wasn't perceiving the structures that had been built up because there weren't any, and was just perceiving what was at the time. When you were perceiving it, it was what is. To strip away these things doesn't mean you have to unlearn everything. It doesn't mean you need to go stick your hand in a fire because you've forgotten that it's hot and you don't want to live through the mental construct that it's hot. You can learn things, learn from experience. But think about it, you don't judge fire for being hot. You don't think, well, if I put my hand in that fire, it's going to burn me because it's out to get me. Because that fire is got these emotional problems and it's gonna, it's trying to drag me down all the time. Of course, it's kind of silly because with inanimate objects, we know they don't have malintent towards us. Sometimes, though, you actually do think they do. Like when you stub your toe and you're like, that table. But we still have mental constructs about inanimate objects, and sometimes we don't ever really see them in extreme forms of this. Instead, we see basically just the idea of the thing. We see all of our memories associated with it. We see what it can do for us. We see our understanding of what it is supposed to be, rather than just seeing that thing right in front of us, that chair right in front of us, that whatever it is, that inanimate object. It's easier, I think, well, is it? I was going to say it's easier to do with inanimate objects because they don't have that extra layer of a personality on top of them, and maybe it is, but on the other hand, maybe it's not because they're so commonplace. At least with people, we know that intrinsically everyone is different. But I don't know. With people, it's especially easy to fall into the trap of not seeing a person as they are and seeing them as how we interpret them. You've probably experienced this with people you know very well, say your parents or a partner in a relationship, where the other person will say something that is not inherently offensive or something that would normally make you angry if anyone else said it, but it sets you off because you know what they meant. They meant something to dig into you, and they said it because they think something bad about you, and they're trying to get a rise out of you. And so then you get angry irrationally because they said, please pass the salt, and you read into it all of these things. You read into it, they think I'm an idiot, they don't really value me. They want me to pass them the salt. I'll show them some salt. Pass to them. That's kind of ridiculous, but it's true. You may have experienced it on the other end, where you said something to someone who you know very well. You didn't mean anything by it, and they take it the wrong way. And they're like, why are you so angry right now? You say, I'm not angry, but then that kind of makes you angry that they assumed you were. And then it feeds into their web of illusions about you. The mind is very good at looking at the past and using it to predict the future. And that can be good in many circumstances. But when it comes to something as complex as people, as something that is constantly changing, humans are constantly changing, each individual. And now some people say people never really change. Okay, maybe. I think it's kind of a paradoxical thing where people are constantly changing and yet they also never change. Figure that one out, I don't know. There are so many things that are not essential to a person that can change for no reason. Basically, who you are, the thing that has always been the same, you can think back to your earliest memories and you know that that feels the same as you do now, which is just the perception of the world, just the thing within you that is aware of the world. That's always the same. And that's actually the same in all of us, and so in many ways we're all the same. But then there's all these things on top of that that create who you are as a person, an individual, what we think of when we say your name. Your appearance, your personality, your likes and dislikes, the way you've been conditioned over the years to interact with the world. Some of those things change very slowly. My hair is brown now, but in however many years it'll be gray. Some of those things can change with the person's effort. Like, if someone's very impatient, they can recognize that and work on it. And then someone who was once impatient can become a patient person because they worked at it. That's that's not an essential part of who they are. And then there are some things that can change for no reason, like that, where all of a sudden one day you have an avid interest in volleyball, or it can go the other way, where for years and years you care very much about collecting wine, rare wines. I don't know why my mind went there. And then one day the interest just goes away. Those things are not essential. And so you have to recognize that when interacting with other people. Now I know people don't radically change from day to day, but it's not fair to see each other just as a thought, as a concept that you've built up from past experience. And I think in order to really reach a higher level of being at peace with the world and with each other, we need to see each other fully as we are now, to strip away that filter that we see the world with, to recognize it's there, and then to say, well, that's not reality, that's just something in my mind. While still learning from lessons of the past. The football will probably get pulled away from you if you go to kick it. But there's no reason to condemn the person for that and project all of these judgments about a person because of that. Anyway, that's just what's on my mind right now. It's a simple thing, I guess, but it goes counter to everything that we're used to doing. And I can't say that I am even close to being able to implement this, but it's just what's been on my mind. Alright, well, until I have more thoughts on weird random things, stay cool. I'll be back one day.